Alright, let's evaluate the following expression and reduce all fractions where possible. So we're going to be using some of the special angles that we looked at, some of the values that we looked at. Sine 60 is going to have a value of square root 3 over 2. So guys, you want to try and memorize that table that I constructed earlier. Tan 30 here is square root 3 over 3 minus cosine 45 is square root 2 over 2, and times sine 30 is 1/2. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to simplify this. Now you're dividing these two fractions together, so you get square root 3 over 2. And when you're dividing two fractions, you multiply by the reciprocal, 3 over square root 3. And you notice that square root 3 divided by square root 3 cancels out, and you actually get 3 over 2. Okay, so instead of writing all of this out, you can write that as 3 over 2, right? If I multiply these two together, you should get square root 2 over 4. So in my next line, I'm going to write 3 over 2 minus square root 2 over 4. And now what you want to do here is you want to find the lowest common denominator. So the lowest common denominator here is 4. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to multiply this by 2 and this by 2. So you get 6 over 4. And then you basically can get 6 over 4 minus square root 2 over 4. And you could just leave your answer like this, right? We're trying to make sure that we have proper form where we simplify our fractions as much as possible and that the denominator doesn't have a radical. So this is our final answer to that question. So this was pretty straightforward. You just gotta have to memorize some of the trig ratios, all right? All right, let's take a look at a much more challenging example. Here we want to evaluate the following expression, reduce all fractions where possible. We want to make sure that there's no radicals on the denominator. Okay, so this time I've thrown in some reciprocal ratios. Now we need to kind of note here that cosecant 60 degrees is basically 1 over sine 60, and sine 60 is basically square root 3 over 2, so 1 over this is basically 2 over square root 3. Now I'll simplify the radical afterwards, right? But if you did want to simplify the radical, you can multiply by square root 3, so you get 2 square root 3 over 3. Okay, so that's the cosecant 60. Cosine 45 degrees, we know the value is square root 2 over 2. And cotangent 30 degrees, this is a reciprocal, this 1 is equal to 1 over tan 30 degrees, which is basically 1 over square root 3 over 3, right? And 1 over square root 3 over 3 is 3 over square root 3. And we can simplify the radical by multiplying by square root 3. So we get 3 over square root 3 over 3. So 3 times square root 3 over 3. So that's that for the first rational on the left. Now let's take a look at the second rational expression on the right. We have secant 45 degrees, which is 1 over cosine 45 degrees, which is basically 1 over square root 2 over 2, which is 2 over square root 2. Okay, so this is secant 45 degrees, it's 2 over square root 2, right? And we can multiply this by square root 2 to simplify it, so we get 2 square root 2 over 2. Okay, then we can take a look at sine 60. We know the value of this is square root 3 over 2. And we have cosecant 30 degrees, which is 1 over sine 30 degrees, which is 1 over 1/2, which is basically 2 over 1. Okay, now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take all of these simplified values that I looked at and I'm going to put it back into my expression. So cosecant 60 we calculated was 2 times square root 3 over 3. Cosine 45 was square root 2 over 2. Cotangent 30 was 3 square root 3 over 3, right? And we're going to add this with secant 45, which we calculated was 2 square root 2 over 2, sine 60, which was square root 3 over 2, and cosecant 30, which is basically 2 over 1, right? And then if I simplify this, I'm going to multiply this out, right? So you get 2 square root 3 times square root 2 here is 2 square root 6 over 6. Okay, I'm going to divide this by 3 square root 3 over 3 plus, right, square root 2 times square root 3, so 2 square root 6 over 4 over 2. Okay, let's simplify this. Let's do this using a different color here. If I simplify this, I'm going to take a look at these two. 2 square root 6 over 6 times, because I'm dividing these two, I'm multiplying the reciprocal, 3 over 3 square root 3, right? And you can notice here that you get 6, 2 times 3 is 6, divided by 6 is 1. So you basically get square root 6 over 3 square root 3. And what we could do here is multiply by square root 3 to simplify this. And we get square root 18 over 9. Okay, so we get square root 18 over 9. I'm going to keep it like that for the time being. We can simplify that afterwards. So that's basically all of this guy here. So this is square root 18 over 9. And then let's take a look at this notion here. So let's take a look at the fraction on the right. And in this case, we get, I use a different color here. I use green. In this notion, we get 2 square root 6 over 4. For dividing by 2 and multiplying by a half, we basically cancel this out. We get square root 6 over 4. Okay. So now in my next line, this is what I'm left with. Square root 18 you can actually write using radical expressions as 9 times 2, which is square root 9 times square root 2, which is 3 square root 2. So you're going to have to memorize you have to kind of know your radical properties, right? So this is 3 square root 2, right, over 9 plus square root 6 over 4. Okay, and now between these two, what you're going to do is find the lowest common denominator. Well, between these two, let's say the lowest common denominator is 36. I'm going to multiply this by 4, and this by 4, this by 9, and this by 9. So now what I'm left with is 12 over square root 2 plus 9 square root 6 over 36. Okay, and this is as far as I can go. I can't really simplify this any further. And the fact is that I can basically try to reduce it, right, by dividing this, and this by 4. If I divide this by 4, right, so divide this by 4, you get 3. Divide this by, oh wait, not 4, sorry. Let's divide it by 3. Okay, let's divide this by 3, you get 4. Divide this by 3, you get 3, and divide this by 3, you get 12. So beyond that, your final answer, as far as you can go with this, is 4 square root 2 plus 3 square root 6 over 12. Okay, so this is the simplified form, and that's your final answer to this expression, right? So you can notice that this was it was pretty complicated as a question, but you can see if you do this step by step and you simplify this repeatedly, you can kind of solve for this very difficult trigonometric expression. All right, so that's the idea really.